Un esprit brillant dans un corps malade. Stephen Hawking est mort à l'âge de 76 ans. Nous l'apprenons ce matin. Nicolas Martin, spécialiste des questions scientifiques sur France Culture, nous rejoindra dans un instant. Nous reviendrons sur les recherches fondamentales de cet astrophysicien, une superstar de la physique, si l'on peut dire.
L'univers peut se créer spontanément, à partir de rien. En outre, on peut calculer la probabilité que l'univers ait été créé dans un état ou dans un autre. Nous pensons avoir résolu le mystère de la création. Peut-être devrions-nous faire breveter l'univers et facturer chacun pour son existence. Si nous sommes les seuls êtres intelligents dans la galaxie, alors il faut s'assurer que nous survivrons et nous continuerons. Mais nous entrons dans une période extrêmement dangereuse. Voilà pourquoi je suis favorable aux vols spatiaux habités.
Cette voix métallique, c'est celle de Stephen Hawking via l'ordinateur qui lui a permis de s'exprimer pendant des années lorsque inexorablement la maladie de Charcot a envahi son corps. Lorsqu'il était étudiant en astronomie, les médecins ne lui donnaient que 2 ans à vivre. Il s'est éteint ce matin à l'âge de 76 ans et il restera comme l'un des plus grands scientifiques de notre époque, consacrant sa vie à percer les secrets de l'univers. Bonjour Nicolas Martin.
Bonjour.
Les fidèles auditeurs de France Culture vous connaissent bien grâce à la méthode scientifique tous les après-midi sur notre antenne. Stephen Hawking était reconnu par ses pairs, Nicolas, pour ses travaux de jeunesse remarquables sur les trous noirs.
Absolument, Stephen Hawking qui voulait faire des mathématiques à l'origine à l'université d'Oxford et puis il s'est finalement orienté vers la physique et très vite il s'intéresse à l'étude des trous noirs avec son collègue Roger Penrose quand il entre à Cambridge où il va faire toute sa carrière, où il pense à un moment donné d'ailleurs puisqu'il est diagnostiqué de la maladie de Charcot au tout début de son arrivée à Cambridge, il pense arrêter son travail scientifique et finalement ils se mettent à travailler sur les équations d'Einstein et sur les trous noirs. Alors il faut savoir Clara qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un trou noir? Un trou noir, c'est avant tout une réponse mathématique à l'équation de la théorie de la relativité générale. Et justement, Hawking va travailler sur ce qu'on appelle la singularité. Qu'est-ce que c'est que la singularité? Eh bien, c'est cet endroit où la gravitation devient tellement importante, les équations de la relativité générale tendent vers l'infini, et d'un seul coup, bien plus rien ne peut s'échapper d'un trou noir. La matière, la lumière, tout est absorbé tellement la gravitation arrive à un point de densité infinie. C'est ça la singularité. C'était un objet mathématique, c'est devenu un objet astrophysique, c'est-à-dire un objet qu'on peut observer. Et tout le travail de Hawking va être sur quelque chose de très contre-intuitif, c'est-à-dire que à cause de cette singularité, à cause de cette gravitation intense, rien ne peut s'échapper d'un trou noir. Et bien Hawking va montrer que malgré tout, un rayonnement peut s'échapper du trou noir. C'est ce qu'on va appeler le rayonnement de Hawking. Qu'est-ce que c'est que le rayonnement de Hawking? Il faut que je vous explique une autre petite chose qui s'appelle la théorie de la fluctuation du vide. C'est-à-dire que bien dans le vide, il y a des duos particules-antiparticules qui se forment en permanence et qui se séparent parce que la particule et l'antiparticule se séparent naturellement. Or, bien dans un trou noir, l'attraction est tellement forte bien que ce duo particule-antiparticule, la particule va pouvoir se libérer et l'autre va être attiré par le trou noir. C'est ça le rayonnement de Hawking, et qui va être une révélation, quelque chose de très contre-intuitif et de très important dans l'astronomie moderne.
Voilà pour les recherches a priori complexes de ce célèbre astrophysicien britannique. Mais Stephen Hawking était aussi, Nicolas, l'incarnation populaire du scientifique. Il a beaucoup œuvré pour vulgariser l'astrophysique.
Oui, alors il y a déjà son livre qui s'appelle Une brève histoire du temps, qu'il écrit en 1988, qui fait partie des grands best-sellers de la littérature scientifique. Et puis Stephen Hawking a très vite compris il était un personnage public, un personnage médiatique, et lui-même était d'ailleurs, il ne s'en cachait pas, un geek, un fan de science-fiction. Il était fan de Star Trek, dans lequel il fait l'apparition d'ailleurs dans un des films, et il va jouer beaucoup avec cette image, jusqu'à d'ailleurs à un moment donné finir par prendre un peu la parole sur des sujets qui le dépasse. Alors, il va se lancer avec un oligarque russe, avec un milliardaire russe qui s'appelle Yuri Milner, dans un projet qui s'appelle Breakthrough Initiative, qui va avoir pour but non seulement d'écouter ou de recevoir des messages extraterrestres, mais aussi éventuellement d'envoyer des petits vaisseaux spatiaux vers d'autres systèmes. Il va commencer à écrire des tribunes contre l'intelligence artificielle, qui vont certaines positions qui vont d'ailleurs lui être reprochées en disant que finalement, même il avait fini par dire un jour que le grand collisionneur de hadrons qui a découvert le boson de Higgs, finalement, s'il découvrait rien, c'était pas très grave. grave. Bref, c'est le problème en fait de cette personnalité médiatique qui, sur les dernières années de sa vie, ont un peu terni l'image du scientifique et du scientifique fondamental et de l'importance de la recherche qu'il a pu apporter à l'astrophysique et à la cosmologie.
Nicolas Martin, la méthode scientifique.
Émission spéciale cet après-midi d'ailleurs sur Stephen Hawking.
À partir de 16h à 17h du lundi au vendredi. Je vous rappelle donc la mort de Stephen Hawking à 76 ans. Ses 3 enfants se disent profondément attristés. Cet univers ne serait pas grand-chose s'il n'abritait pas les gens qu'on aime, avait un jour déclaré Stephen Hawking.
Good evening. Tonight we go after a fantastic story. The story that flying saucers from other worlds are visiting our planet, just as we are exploring outer space with our own rocket satellites. Our guest is former Marine Air Corps Major Donald Kehoe, who has the support of scores of prominent businessmen, military men, and some scientists in his campaign to prove that flying saucers exist. If you're curious to know why Major Kehoe charges that the United States Air Force is deliberately deluding us when it calls saucer stories the bunk, if you want to hear his own evidence that the saucers are real, and his reaction to the claim of 2 Americans who say they've spoken with men from Venus, we'll go after those stories in just a moment.
The Mike Wallace Interview.
And now to our story. Major Donald Kehoe is the director of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. As head of this private group interested in flying saucers, he's repeatedly attacked the United States Air Force and others for claiming that flying saucers are apparently flights of fancy and not flights by Martians or men from the moon. Independent surveys show that millions of Americans do share his belief in these celestial saucers. Major Kehoe, first of all, let me ask you this. Most people in the United States, in spite of the fact that I say that millions do believe, I think you will agree that most people in the United States don't believe in flying saucers from outer space. They probably hold the view of columnist Bob Considine, who wrote that flying saucers are products of, for the most part, quote, pranksters, half-wits, cranks, publicity hounds, fanatics in general, and screwballs, end quote. How do you feel about Mr. Considine's charge?
Well, I know where he got the story. He got it from Colonel Watson out at the Air Technical Intelligence Center in Dayton. In fact, the colonel went even a little farther, and he said behind every sighting was an idiot, a crackpot, a religious fanatic. That included a lot of high-ranking Air Force pilots, incidentally, and many airline captains, people who were qualified to see these things. But he was just following out an Air Force policy.
Well, now, you're not suggesting that Bob Considine is in the pay of the Air Force. He's an independent newsman with a considerable reputation.
I mean the colonel. No, I have every respect for Bob Considine.
In spite of the fact that he suggests that pranksters, half-wits, and screwballs are responsible for the stories about flying saucers.
Well, I wish I could show him any time a list of about 800 witnesses, some of the big names in aviation, including up to the rank of colonel in the Air Force. They're still flying, and they're still carrying passengers. They've never been grounded. They're still guiding airliners in, the radar men are, night after night in bad weather. If they're screwballs and incompetence, why are they still on the job?
Major Kehoe, where do you think flying saucers are coming from?
I don't know. There is an indication that they could be using Mars as a base. I don't mean they originate there, but every time Mars has approached us in the last 10 years, there's been a noticeable increase in saucer sightings. And that's been mentioned officially. In fact, the Canadian official project, on the basis of that, set up an observation station in Canada.
You say the Canadian official project. What do you mean by the official?
There was an official project called Project Magnet. And they set up an observatory at Shirley Bay to try to track these things. And
what happened to the official project? You say there was a project.
Yes, they ran for about a year, and they had one sighting on a gravimeter, which indicated that something, a very large object, had flown over there. But they finally decided they were spending a little too much money on it, I suppose.
Well, certainly they wouldn't have thought that they were spending too much money on it if they believed that that kind of phenomena existed.
Well, a lot of people on the project are still working up there on their own time, and certain government officials have still kept the lid on their reports in Canada, just as they do down here.
What is your theory? In other words, you suggest that they come from Mars or from other planets, from other solar systems possibly throughout the universe. Is that correct?
Yes, and there are a lot of scientists who said the same thing.
What is your theory as to the kind of people who fly these, or the kind of beings who fly these saucers?
Well, that's speculation. Willie Lay said recently they'd be just like the man next door, the invaders from space, and his reasons may be good. But most of the top scientists have said that the odds are that beings from other worlds would not be like us. Some of them would be. Dr. Harlow Shapley, for instance, said that there probably were at least 100 million inhabited planets in the universe. And Menzel, who doesn't believe in saucers at all, says that he goes that high or even higher. And among those, they must be, by the law of averages, a certain number of planets that would be like the Earth. And if evolution started at the same time, why, you might have the same type of being.
What do you think are the intentions of these people, for lack of a better name, of these people who are in these flying saucers?
Well, there's been no evidence of any hostility. During the last 10 years, what we call the modern phase, there have been sightings before then. There have been some accidents, Air Force pilots chasing these things. Captain Mantell was killed chasing one in 48, and 2 pilots disappeared chasing one in 53 over Lake Superior. But I think those were just accidents.
Just accidents. Why don't they try to communicate with us? What's your theory about that?
Well, I'll follow some of the theories the Air Force people have said. They suggested to me back in 52 and 53, at which time we were cooperating. I had a lot of very good friends in the Air Force at that time. The policy was to give out the information. They were about to tell the people everything they had. And the theory was then that perhaps these beings were so much different from us that communication would be a very hard thing. They might not, for instance, have speech sounds like ours. That's one answer. Another thing, they might not be able to exist in our atmosphere. We're going to land on the moon, we'll have to wear spacesuits or else build air-conditioned buildings up there, air pressured. There could be lots of factors like that.
Well, do you think they're down here when we do see them to look at us?
I think that it's probably a long-range survey.
A long-range survey?
That's right.
And yet no attempt, as far as we know in any case, of communication with us.
There have been claims of communication, but most of those have been by individuals. The Air Force has not admitted that there's ever been one, and I don't know, our committee hasn't found any cases that we would accept as absolutely verified.
All right, now, let's go at it from another point of view, if I may, the Air Force point of view. They agree, undoubtedly, objects have been seen in the sky. But the Air Force has said time and time again, and this is a quote from Richard Horner, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Research and Development. All but a small percentage of these reports of unidentified flying objects have been definitely attributed to natural phenomena that are neither mysterious nor dire, end quote. Weather balloons, mirages, ordinary sky phenomena like meteors, airplanes themselves. What about that?
I'll answer that, but I'd like to make several points doing it. In 1947, the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Dayton, the top Air Force intelligence men and scientists under contract, sent a secret document to the commanding general of the Air Force saying that whatever these things were, they were real. In 1948, ATIC, the same group, sent a top secret estimate to the commanding general, Hoyt Vandenberg, said these were interplanetary space. In 1952, there was an intelligence analysis of the maneuvers of these things, as seen by radar, triangulation, radar photographs, and in 53, the Central Intelligence Agency and the Air Force had a special panel of scientists meet at the Pentagon to tell them what to do. And after they got through, this group said, you don't have proof that these things exist, not scientific proof, but you have a very strong circumstantial case. We suggest you quadruple the investigation, set up special observation posts. In the meantime, release everything you've got to the American people. Now, you've got 4 documents there that they've been sitting on all this time. Now, and they have been spending a lot of money investigating flying saucers. If they don't exist, why the money? Why did the intelligence teams rush out every time there's a sighting?
Now then, you have mentioned 4 documents that you claim exist. We've heard in the past that you have claimed that these documents existed. We've seen your literature in which you talk about the existence of those documents. So we spoke with the Air Technical Intelligence Center at the Pentagon earlier this week, and this is what we were told officially by them. 3 of the 4 documents Major Kehoe refers to simply do not exist. The 4th document does exist. You can have a copy of it, Mr. Wallace, and you can see that it doesn't say what Major Kehoe claims it says. We have a copy of it, and I quote to you from the copy. The Air Force document says just this. The panel recommends that the national security agencies take immediate steps to strip the UFOs of the special status they have been given and the aura of mystery they have unfortunately acquired. We suggest an integrated program designed to reassure the public of the total lack of evidence of inimical forces behind the phenomena. And again, as I point out, Secretary Horner says it simply ain't so. Now, why? The point really at issue here, it would seem, Major Kehoe, is this. Why do you believe that the Air Force says that nothing is going on? Why do you believe that it's a fairly serious charge that
I know
you make.
it is.
You make the charge that the United States government is withholding from the people of the United States certain very important information. Why? What would their motive be for withholding that kind of information from us?
Well, I'll answer that, but I would also like to show you some proof that they are withholding it. The reason that was given to me when they were working with me back in 52 and 53 was, first, that they were afraid of hysteria. Remember the Orson Welles show way years back when he scared people into the hills with the idea of invading Martians? Then they were also afraid that it would upset organized religion. That was a smaller factor, but there was some fear of it. Later they were afraid that these accidents, when interceptors had chased these things and had been lost or had crashed, might be considered proof of hostility. Now, I would never have put my name on anything if it were a matter of personal opinion. I've talked to and read the reports of hundreds of pilots and radar men and guided missile trackers who've seen these things, and some of them are very important names. The Air Force says they have this down to 1.9%, but you'll notice the word current in there. They mean we are currently explaining. Now, I have in my possession a copy of Special Report 14, which is their Bible on this. In the back, it has a table showing that 3,201 cases they examined, 19.5% were unsolved, and they admit they still are unsolved. You add up what they've had since then, it makes over 12% of the reports, and those are mostly from the best possible sources.
Well, now, wait just a second. I'll use your figures. The Department of Defense released an official bulletin on November 5th, 1957, saying that from June of 55 to June of 57, a 2-year period, just a fraction over 2% of all investigated unidentified flying objects had to be listed as unknown. 2%. So that's your 1.9.
What was the period again?
55 to 57. The rest were determined to have been balloons, airplanes, hoaxes, and a category about 12% called insufficient information, which means that the report was so flimsy that there was simply nothing to check on. I must confess that they've certainly shown me no classified material, but they have opened their files quite willingly to us in our preparation for this program tonight. And they've given us very convincing evidence, Major Kehoe, that it is largely, I shouldn't say largely, I'll say 99 and 44/100% a hoax. Now, you mentioned...
A hoax?
Well, when
I say a lot of good pilots hoaxers, then.
No, not hoaxers. I thank you for correcting me. Not just a hoax, but let's say misinformation or sightings of objects which seem to be one thing but are in fact another. I'm glad that you corrected me about hoax, because it was by no means that much a hoax. But you mentioned a Dr. Donald Menzel, who's a professor of astrophysics at Harvard before. Now, I think you will agree that he's one of the world's most distinguished astrophysicists. Is that not so?
I think there are others who are equally capable, but do not agree with him.
He is one of the world's most distinguished astrophysicists, though I think we can agree on that. In any case, he stresses, you see, that pilots are not expert observers, that they, as well as others, can see flying saucers when it's only, to quote him, the wrapper off somebody's lunch blowing around in the air, end quote. But again, let's come back to the point, the most important point, Major Kehoe, and that is why will the Air Force, why will the United States government withhold information from United States citizens? For what reason?
Because they're treating them like children, the way they did with the H-bomb at first, and the way they've been doing with other things. Now, I'm not attacking the United States Air Force. I'm attacking a small group in there that has been persistently keeping this from the public, just as they've kept other things. For a long time, you couldn't even mention the idea that we could be hit by missiles from submarines from the Gulf and from both coasts very easily. I knew that years and years ago and tried to get it out, and at the time was discouraged about it. Now, you mentioned this denial of these documents. Now, I'd like to tell you something that happened on the Armstrong Circle Theater. I had requested that those points be in the script, and I was discouraged from it at first by their writer. Then later, some of our Board of Governors insisted that we have those points included. So I said, either I don't go on or we have those in there. So I said, all right. So the script was completely rewritten. Now, those were in the script as it was first rehearsed, but when the second rehearsal came along, and the Air Force saw the mimeograph sheet, the Air Force representative, according to the Armstrong writer, said they would immediately deny it on the air, even though it meant denouncing their own former project chief. Now, the source for this is Captain Edward Ruppelt, who was the head of Project Blue Book for 2 years, and at that time he was considered good enough that he briefed President Truman on these things. Mm-hmm. He was the top man. Rank didn't mean anything. It's your experience that counted. All right. He says these things existed. He put it in the book, which was cleared by Security and Review in the Air Force. On December 5th, 1955, that was cleared. It's in his book. He's never been hauled in and court-martialed. Now, I have here, and if you allow your camera to come in on it, this is a sheet from the script of the Armstrong Theater, which was deleted. This was crossed off, and I was told that I couldn't say it on the air. Mm-hmm. Now, that was censorship by intimidation. This can be matched up with the other sheets from the Armstrong Circle script, and any typewriter expert will show you.
Well, I'm certain
they ordered it taken out.
I'm certain that people believe you. The only thing is that the next morning I distinctly remember reading a report by you, Major Kehoe, to the effect that no censorship, no pressure of any kind had been put upon you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wallace. I know that statement almost by heart.
Yes.
I said that CBS and the Armstrong people were not to blame for cutting me off the air when I tried to mention the fact that a Senate committee was working on the secrecy angle. I never mentioned this that night to anyone because I had promised that I wouldn't say anything about it on the air that day, the Armstrong people. It was taken out, and I will do this. I will ask the United States Air Force to have the Marine Corps put me on active duty for court-martial if that is not the case.
Major Kehoe, I understand you have 3 new reports on file, which in your opinion, you have them currently on file, and they're new reports, and these, in your opinion, would convince every person in this country that flying saucers are a fact. Is that correct?
They should convince a lot of people because of the names involved.
Tell us about it.
I told your interviewer in Washington that I couldn't mention the names because they were too high. One of them is a top scientist in this country whose name would be known to everybody.
Well, why wouldn't he want his...
Because he's afraid of the official ridicule.
He's afraid of official ridicule?
That's right.
More afraid of official ridicule than of possibly alerting the country to a serious national danger?
You'd be surprised how many people give us reports and they say, please keep my name confidential. Well, I'll give you one report which came to us. The name has to be left out. In 1951, a UFO circled the fleet in Korean waters. It circled it at high speed, and they launched several planes to try to get a close in on it. They got a radar lock on. That is, the radar was guiding the planes toward the object. Mm-hmm. This was picked up by radars on 14 naval vessels. This object circled about, for a half an hour more, and then it took off at a speed way over in excess of 1,000 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. This report was certified, and 9 members of our Board of Governors saw it, signed it, and agreed that they had seen it, and agreed to the contents.
Yeah.
there's another report that just came in from 4 top missile designers or engineers at one of the big plants in this country. They saw an elliptically shaped object and 2 small round disc-shaped objects flying with it over California, November 11th, 1957, at a speed of at least 5,000 miles an hour. These men are well qualified to know what they see, with broad daylight, not a cloud in the sky. There have been cases even where the Air Force has shot at these things. Now, if there's nothing there and they don't exist, why do they shoot at them? You mentioned Mr. Horner. The day after Mr. Horner said that the Air Force was not concealing anything, Captain Gregory Oldenburg, a public information officer at Langley Field, refused to let an ad be inserted in the Langley Base Flyer, their newspaper, which asked that anybody interested in UFOs please communicate and form a little group. He said, I must refuse to do this because the dissemination of information on UFOs is contrary to Air Force policy and Air Force Regulation 200-2. And I have a copy of it here in case you want to see it.
Well, Major Kehoe, I must say that the Air Force tells us they don't question your motives, but they do question the accuracy of a good deal of your information, and for that reason they say you have been, and were they to, in a sense, throw open an invitation to all people who cite UFOs to get in touch with them once again. They'd get all kinds of cranks, hoaxers, and so forth, and you see they run down every one of these sightings, and it has cost them a tremendous amount of money to no avail over the past few years.
That's what they told you.
That is what they told me. Now, sir, in a moment I'd like to ask you this. In the past few years, millions of flying saucer enthusiasts have become excited about the stories of 2 men, George Adamski and Howard Menger. Both of them claim to have seen flying saucers. Menger claims to have been given a ride in one by some creatures from Venus. Adamski says he's chatted with a man from Venus in the California desert. I'd like to get your reaction to those stories, and we'll get Major Kehoe's reaction in just 60 seconds. All right, Major, about George Adamski and Howard Menger, both men claim to have talked with men from Venus. Menger claims that he's even taken a ride on a flying saucer. Do you believe them?
No.
You think they are hoaxers?
We do not accept any reports of these so-called contactees without more evidence. We've asked them to submit their claims and take lie detector tests. We don't throw them out. We simply say we'll give you a fair chance. I think that's the least important part of the picture. The most important part is the weight of evidence from hundreds of competent people. I'd like to name a few. Captain Richard Case, American Airlines. Captain C.S. Childs, Eastern Airlines. Captain T. Kravitz, TWA. Robert Dickus, TWA. Colonel Donald J. Blakesley, U.S. Air Force, a wing commander. I could go down the list of people who know what they're doing, and they're still on duty, they're still flying.
Major Kehoe, what would you like to see done about flying saucers that is not currently being done? What steps would you like to see taken?
I think the American people should write to their congressman and insist that open hearings be held by the Senate Committee on the Permanent Committee on Government Operations, which has been looking into this for 6 months.
An Air Force spokesman told us this last week. He said members of the Senate subcommittee have talked with us already, and they have shown no interest in conducting any hearings on this issue.
I talked with the chief investigator within the last 2 weeks. I gave him a lot of information, and I gave him data on one case where an airliner was sent to chase one of these things, and the passengers kept in ignorance of it at that time. That involves 2 government agencies beside the Air Force, which has refused to release the report. And I'll say this: if the committee were to get Ruppelt, Major Fournet, several colonels who were on that time, Major General Garland, who was on the project, it would be a big revelation, because the Air Force is simply treating the American people like children. They don't trust them with the facts.
You know, here's an interesting question, Major. The United States and Russia have started sending satellites into the sky, and we may be hitting the moon with a rocket soon, possibly Mars. You believe that creatures from outer space have space stations on Mars. What's going to happen when we start firing rockets at the moon or at Mars?
That question's already been brought up. We expect to have a base on the moon within the next 5 years. It's possible that there is a base on there. I don't say there was any proof of it.
Is it possible we're going to start an interplanetary war when we start sending our rockets to the moon and to Mars?
In 1935, General Douglas MacArthur said the next war would be an interplanetary war, and we'd have to unite against people from other planets.
One last question, Major Kehoe. Have you ever seen a flying saucer?
I've seen them tracked on radar, but I take the word of about 800 of the best witnesses in this country and abroad.
But you yourself have never seen a flying saucer?
I've just been a reporter, and a careful one.
Thank you very much, Major Donald Kehoe. As you've just heard, the flying saucer controversy is deadlocked in contradictory statements and interpretation of facts. As for Major Donald Kehoe himself, like most of us, he's never seen a flying saucer, which may just make him like a mystic who's never seen a ghost. But one must give him credit. He has much faith.
they're being surrounded by friggin' UFOs, or the Coast Guard. I want us in, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 lights we see there. They've been coming on, they were 7 lights. Oh, this is a big help. They're keeping pace with us.
Liliane Lefeld, Serge Liffard, vous étiez à peu près à la même place hier soir lorsque vous avez aperçu dans le ciel quelque chose d'un peu extraordinaire.
Oui, c'était vers 17h moins 15. On était sur même place en regardant les couchers de soleil, admirable d'ailleurs, et tout d'un coup j'ai crié, voilà, regarde, regarde, dans le ciel on voit Apollo 7, voilà les cosmonautes. Et puis on a aperçu que ça a pris une trajectoire vers l'est. Et ça a duré pendant une demi-heure. L'objet céleste ressemblait à 5 francs en argent, très brillant, très blanc. Et au bout d'une demi-heure, n'est-ce pas, les soleils s'est couché définitivement. Et l'objet changeait de couleur en bleu, en orange. Et au moins de 30 secondes, ça a pris une vitesse d'un hauteur, ça a pris altitude, oui. Et ça a disparu sans laisser une trace ni une trajectoire.
Pour moi, le plus impressionnant, c'était quand ça changeait la direction subitement. J'avais l'impression que c'était un ordre par un homme qui a donné l'ordre de changer de direction. C'était très impressionnant.
Alors c'est donc ici, au bord de cette petite route, que la dizaine de témoins a pu observer le phénomène. Alors comment ça s'est passé?
Les voitures se sont arrêtées ici, à bout de course, sans moteur, sans phare.
Oui.
Et les témoins sont descendus et ont d'abord pris une photo d'ici. L'objet se trouvait juste au-dessus des haies, vous voyez
de la
en
haie,
face.
de la petite haie là, oui.
Absolument, où il y a une vingtaine de mètres, mais assez loin, disons à 300 mètres.
Ils sont deux à s'être approchés de cette barrière. Patrick, 21 ans, profondément choqué, ne veut plus voir personne. Quant à l'autre témoin, il a pris des photos, mais, fait troublant, la pellicule n'a pas été impressionnée. Ingénieur électronicien et lieutenant de réserve de l'armée de l'air, c'est dans l'anonymat qu'il a accepté de raconter ce qu'il a vu.
Arrivé à quelques centaines de mètres de l'endroit où nous voyons l'objet, le moteur s'est arrêté avec les phares. Ma radio qui était allumée s'est éteinte.
Sans raison apparente.
Sans raison apparente. Et je ne crois pas avoir été pris de panique à ce moment-là. C'était la forme de deux assiettes renversées l'une sur l'autre, avec les bords arrondis. Ça avait un mouvement de rotation, à l'inverse des aiguilles d'une montre. Ça tournait lentement, et il apparaissait comme des phares ou des hublots, ou quelque chose de ressemblant à des hublots, qui diffusaient une lumière plus orange que l'appareil lui-même, sans émettre un rayonnement comme des phares de voiture. Et puis, ceci oscillait sur lui-même, et nous avions l'impression que c'était un anneau qui tournait lentement, et de ça s'est détaché un cône, une forme de quartier de tarte, arrondi au sommet, conique à la base, s'est détaché lentement, en oscillant verticalement, et nous n'avons jamais eu l'impression que l'objet diminuait de grandeur par rapport à nous, et pourtant il s'est éloigné. Et cet objet semblait moins matériel que ce que nous voyons.
Il est revenu ensuite.
Il est revenu, au bout de 10 minutes, et aussi rapidement, et je vais dire aussi lentement qu'il était sorti, parce que ça nous a paru très long. Il a eu cette oscillation verticale et s'est replacé dans l'objet.
Et ensuite l'objet a disparu complètement.
L'objet, avant de disparaître, a arrêté d'osciller sur lui-même, et il ne tournait plus non plus sur lui-même. Nous n'avons plus l'impression de voir ses hublots, et c'est disparu très rapidement, et pourtant nous avions l'impression que c'était lent. Mais très rapidement, de 3 à 5 secondes, ce n'était plus qu'un point dans le ciel.
Qu'est-ce qu'il fait? C'est trop bien, papa, regarde ça.
J'en ai un, Dave, j'en ai un. Tu le vois sur mon téléphone?
Papa, c'est quoi les trucs bleus là?
Les petites lumières dans ses poches.
Regarde, il y en a un au-dessus de toi là, au-dessus, là, presque vers la lune là.
Attends, je le vois pas. Ah non, il y en a là, regarde.
Il y en a plein, regarde.
Regarde.
Il y en a plein de points, car il y en a encore un là-bas.
Eh, c'est quoi ce bordel là?
Il s'explose pas?
Eh, c'est quoi ce carnage? Regarde.
Ouais, je le vois.
T'as vu le délire, hein?
Ouais, bah, je vais aller coucher, je vais passer.
Je peux pas le prendre.
Allez, rentre.
Est-ce que tu pourras me l'envoyer ou un truc comme ça? Parce que je peux pas le prendre.
O.V.N.I 2018, les mecs.
Comment t'arrives à l'avoir?
Regarde, il accélère. Les gars, ils sont deux. Eh, regarde, tu vois ou pas? Regarde. Regarde, il change de trajectoire. Eh, Dave, ça... Regarde comment ça accélère, Dave.
Oui, il y en a qui revient. Pardon. Attends, il y a deux. Il y a deux. Un là, et il bouge depuis tout à l'heure.
Elle est dans les nuages.
Ouais. Qu'est-ce que vous me dites? Oui. Arrêtez, j'ai peur. Regarde là-haut encore. Et il bouge.
Mais non, regarde.
Mais non, c'est des feux d'artifice.
Ouais.
Moi, j'arrive d'artifice.
Regarde, il est là, regarde-le.
C'est spécial. Oh oui, grave. Là, regarde. Regarde, il revient, lui, c'est ce que j'ai dit.
Et là, regarde, 1, 2, 3, regarde, 1, 2, 3 là, comme ça, regarde.
C'est quoi ça?
C'est des O.V.N.I.
C'est pas des drogues? Non, papa.
Je les vois.
Comment des ovnis?
Je les vois tout à l'heure.
Il y en a un,
ça?
Mais non, c'est pas
Ouais, c'est à la vitesse là.
c'est la tour, elle tourne. Oui, c'est la tour sur la mer.
La tour elle tourne sur la mer. Et c'est quoi ce téléphone alors?
Que de la merde, les gars. Non, bah c'est bizarre, ouais, ça. Non, c'est pas. Non, ça bouge vraiment.
Dave, il y en a la blinde.
Tu connais Charlotte?
Dave, regarde.
Ils ont attendu 2018 pour nous envahir.
Ah, ça y est, j'en ai un.
Moi j'en ai pas là. Ah si, c'est bon.
Regardez, ils s'arrêtent de plus en plus. Regardez, il y en a un tout en haut.
Putain, mon téléphone il marche.
Oh, regardez, il y en a deux côtes.
Bouge pas mon épaule.
Ah, j'aime bien celui-là. En fait, ça explose, mais ça envoie des autres en même temps. Non, mais c'est des avions, les gars, arrêtez de.
Mais
Genre, les avions, ça se. Oh, facile, regarde, il y en a deux. Oh, il y en a encore plein, là, il y en a trois à côté. Non, je bouge pas.
Bah, si.
Regarde, là, il y en a trois qui volent trois à côté. C'est ce que je viens de dire.
Alors, c'est des avions? Tu te fous de la gueule. Dave, il y en a un jaune. Dave, il y en a un jaune.
Oh, oui.
Dave, il y en a un. Regarde là. Regarde au-dessus là. Et celui-là, comment il est rapide, regarde dans l'air. T'as vu le jaune?
Mon téléphone il peut pas. Il y a un violet.
Regarde, il y en a encore, il y en a encore.
C'est des ovnis, ça.
Ouais, c'est des ovnis.
Je l'appelle les lobes. C'est des ovnis, quoi? C'est des vaisseaux spatials. C'est des vaisseaux spatials. Non, c'est que c'est moi en plus. Moi, je suis en train de faire ça. C'est Antoine!
De fou, hein. T'as vu, on les voit bien.
Arrêtez de me faire peur, s'il vous plaît.
Oh là, ouvre tes yeux, ils regardent. C'est tout ce que je peux te dire.
Mais en fait, c'est les trois qui ont volé côte à côte, ils m'ont choqué. Elle est où, la mienne? Ah, merci.
Allez, qui est fermé ta gueule.
C'est la merde.
Ouais, c'est de la bombe.
iPhone, c'est de la bombe.
Attends, arrête de faire bouger, là, c'est... Ils sont durs à filmer. Ça y est, j'en ai un. Bouge pas plus. Ciel plus que nuageux, à tendance tempétueuse. Observation d'une trentaine de boules lumineuses d'origine inconnue devant une dizaine de témoins.
Oh, regarde là-bas.
Et pas d'alcool de consommer en excès.
Il y en a partout.
Bah ouais, mais c'est un truc de fou. Parce qu'il y a beaucoup de nuages, du coup c'est dur à les filmer. Regarde, ça y est, il est là.
Oh, tu pourras pas m'envoyer des photos ou un truc comme ça, oui.
Attends, j'essaie de... Attends, parce que là, quand ils sont dans les nuages, c'est chaud. Regarde, il y en a là en haut encore.
Mon téléphone est parti.
Ah oui, regarde. Tac. Il y en a là. Il y en a un dans les nuages là derrière.
Voilà.
Bah, ils sont là.
Je crois qu'ils vont venir chez nous.
Ça fait longtemps qu'ils sont là déjà.
Je crois qu'ils vont venir chez nous. Ouais. Parce que là, ils sont nombreux quand même.
Ouais, mais c'était avant nous.
Arrête.
Ils étaient là avant nous.
Tu crois?
Ouais.
Et pourquoi ils sont partis alors?
Ils sont jamais partis.
Tu crois qu'ils sont parmi nous? Oh, ça y est. Oh, c'est les Illuminati.
Là, il y en a un.
Ouais, il y en a un.
Une étoile, ça s'appelle des étoiles.
Non, c'est pas des étoiles. Regarde, il y en a plein. Non, je l'ai payé, il est parti dans les nuages.
Il est bizarre, les gars.
Voilà.
Noah. Alors on passe d'un objet à un autre, hein. C'est pas le même pouvoir que tout à l'heure, c'est des objets différents. Il y en a eu un qui était un peu plus jeune que les autres et plus rapide aussi. Et feu d'artifice, hein, le feu d'artifice en premier plan est bien au-dessus, et bien au-dessus de tout ça. Un survol de sphères lumineuses bleues, blanc. Et une jaune, plus rapide que les autres.
Ouais, et
voilà.
3 lignes.
Donc on a vu passer environ une trentaine, 30 boules lumineuses. Le ciel est fort couvert comme vous pouvez le voir, je filmé la lune.
On dirait un reporter.
Voilà, vous voyez, attends plus que couvert.
Là-bas, il y en a un qui monte.
Voilà, un qui prend de l'altitude. Et qui se dissimule dans les nuages comme les autres. Voilà. Observation de janvier 2018. Minuit 10. Amis youtubeurs, amis ufologues,
Voilà, ils ont dit
bonne année à tous.
Alors nous allons voir maintenant quels sont les effets de ces champs sur des fluides, en particulier sur l'eau, et dans le domaine de la giration. Je voudrais que nous mettions un contact MHD entre cet appareil donc et...
Alors ici, dans cette petite manip, eh bien, on va créer un champ de force dans le liquide. Est-ce qu'on pourrait voir cette chose-là sur la caméra, s'il vous plaît? Voilà. Et alors à ce moment-là, je vais mettre le contact et vous allez voir comment ces forces électromagnétiques mettent en rotation. Vous voyez cette rotation du liquide qui est assez intense, qui est donnée justement par cet accélérateur. Bien, maintenant, une deuxième manip, ici, nous avons un accélérateur cylindrique qui va lui accélérer le liquide. Je ne peux pas garder le contact pendant très longtemps parce que l'intensité fait un peu chauffer mes fils. Est-ce que vous pouvez montrer maintenant cette cuve, s'il vous plaît? Voilà, contact. Vous voyez l'accélération assez forte obtenue par les forces MHD. Bien, et maintenant je vais mettre le contact sur une troisième machine qui est un accélérateur pariétal, qui se trouve décrit dans l'article de Pour la science. Vous avez ici une succession d'électrodes parallèles, comme ceci, et quand je vais mettre le contact, vous allez bien observer, vous allez voir comment cet accélérateur pariétal tire le fluide à lui. Voici. Vous voyez cette accélération assez intense, c'est très rapide.
C'est phénoménal.
Et maintenant, nous avons placé cet accélérateur pariétal sur un appareil qui est carrément une sorte de petit sous-marin. Je vais le montrer un petit peu dans la caméra. Est-ce que vous pouvez le regarder un petit peu en gros plan? Vous le voyez?
Un sous-marin MHD.
Un sous-marin MHD, mais vous avez ici ces électrodes qui sont tout autour. Il est également décrit dans l'article de Pour la science. Et nous allons activer ce sous-marin, nous allons lui donner du courant électrique. Et il va à ce moment-là devant vous agir sur son milieu liquide. Regardez bien. Vous voyez le pompage obtenu par ce petit sous-marin électromagnétique.
Jean-Pierre Petit, tout ceci peut nous convaincre qu'effectivement nous sommes à la veille d'une grande révolution dans le domaine de la physique des plasmas, également de la physique de demain tout court, puisque nous en avons parlé en introduction tout à l'heure. Il s'agit d'une solution énergétique possible, il s'agit d'une solution au mouvement. Je voudrais que nous fassions maintenant un saut au 22, au 23e siècle, ou dans les siècles prochains, de cette fameuse technologie des siècles à venir, en hallucinant une sorte de tableau des applications possibles de la MHD.
Eh bien, la MHD, d'abord, il faudrait qu'elle existe en France. C'est quelque chose qui avait démarré il y a une vingtaine d'années. On avait des projets assez ambitieux qui étaient gérés par le CEA, l'Institut français du pétrole, la CGE. Et puis, il y a 10 ans, on a été découragé par les difficultés à la fois techniques et scientifiques qui ont été rencontrées. Il y a eu une sorte de récession économique en France et on a complètement abandonné ces recherches. Et je crois que c'est vraiment extrêmement regrettable. On a abandonné ces recherches en France, on les a abandonnées aussi plus ou moins en Angleterre, plus ou moins en Amérique également. Et les seuls qui n'ont pas abandonné sont les Russes.
Alors, il faut espérer que ces recherches seront reprises très prochainement. C'est une chose absolument indispensable. Mais Peut-on rêver à ce moment-là d'applications, par exemple, dans le domaine des déplacements des aérodynes, des vaisseaux? J'ai parlé tout à l'heure des vaisseaux de Grisfos. Pourquoi ne pas imaginer d'énormes vaisseaux propulsés par des énergies fabriquées par les générateurs MHD?
Eh bien, actuellement, vous savez qu'on court après la fusion contrôlée qui nous donnerait à ce moment-là de grandes densités de puissance et d'énergie électrique. Eh bien, si nous disposons un jour de moteurs électriques, de générateurs électriques suffisamment puissants, eh bien, les véhicules ne seront pas des avions, les véhicules seront des aérodynes MHD, comme celui que vous voyez sur vos dessins.
Ce sont donc des aérodynes MHD. Nous pouvons, Jean-Pierre Petit, d'abord vous remercier d'être venu avec nous dans le temps X, et d'autre part, nous pouvons donc faire un saut subjectif de 20 ans en avant pour imaginer ce que seront donc ces aérodynes, ces engins MHD, ce que sera la physique et le monde qu'aura généré cette physique de demain.
Tonight on Hard Copy, startling videotape of a UFO, and it comes from an unexpected source, the U.S. Air Force.
The government has more information than it is generally willing to reveal to the public.
This is no home video. These pictures were taken by a sophisticated military tracking system, and it's got operators baffled.
I don't know.
Exclusive, the Air Force UFO.
Now, a new UFO mystery over the Nevada desert, and this time, pictures of the strange objects were captured by none other than the U.S. Air Force.
I don't know.
These are the secret images captured by a state-of-the-art military radar tracking system. Images which raise new questions about the U.S. military's knowledge of UFOs.
Where'd it come from?
It might look like a home video, but the numbers burned into the screen are actually high-tech computer-generated coordinates, like something out of Star Trek. That's how radar operators can tell exactly where the object is and how fast it's going.
This is sort of a Nintendo game for adults who are playing serious games.
These videos were recorded near Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, home of the infamous UFO hotspot known as Area 51. This is where top-secret military aircraft are designed and tested, and even though the Pentagon denies it, some say it's where the U.S. government secretly investigates UFOs.
People need to know that this does exist. Sightings are occurring more and more.
This man, we'll call him Steve, worked on top-secret projects at Nellis Air Force Base, and he says UFO sightings are common there.
This wasn't the first time I've seen the videos. I've seen other videos that are similar to this. It just lent to the validity of what I already believe. They're here.
The first of two videos obtained exclusively by hard copy shows a tiny dot over the horizon. Radar operators are having a hard time figuring out what it is.
Required this unknown object, aircraft some type. It seems to be hovering here.
Look at the readout in the upper right-hand corner. It says the object being tracked is over 10,000 meters away. That's about 6.5 miles. Whatever it is, it's solid and large enough to spike the radar return.
This target is fairly stationary until the very end, when it moves extremely rapidly. It must have a fairly large radar cross-section to return the signal back. That's why I believe the object was fairly large.
A second video from Nellis Air Force Base. This time the target moves slowly above the horizon. Once again, radar operators have no clue what they're looking at.
They're familiar with all types of military targets. This very much surprised them. They're very much trying to figure out what type of targets these are.
We asked Chuck DeCaro, a nationally recognized expert on military technology, to take a look at the tapes.
There are many possibilities there. If you can eliminate all those possibilities, then you come up with some technology that is unknown. And that would be a very big story.
Hard copy had one of the Air Force tapes digitally enhanced. The result? There are no wings or rotor blades visible on this craft. But is it a visitor from outer space? Or could it be a classified military project? A high-tech flying object hatched from Area 51?
The government has more information than it is generally willing to reveal to the public.
Another look at the secret Air Force tape. Notice how the object continues upward and seems to change shape. The object might be a weather balloon buffeted by the wind, or the transformation could be attributed to a reflection. Rich Terrell is an astronomer and an expert in optics.
Under those lighting circumstances, you get reflections, you get different changes in the way an object will appear without it ever changing shape. It's just the lighting that's changing.
But Steve insists that there is more to this video than meets the eye. He says the radar operators who recorded these images know what they saw. They just can't explain what they are.
Based on my experiences, both personal and military, there's no doubt these alien systems exist.
No surprise when we tried to contact authorities for an official response. Both Nellis Air Force Base and the Pentagon declined to comment.
serio? Eccolo là, eccolo là. Go qua, aspetta. Ecco. Che storia, guarda che è. Ah, si è diviso, guarda questo. Oh, uno è volato via. Ce n'è uno piccolo che gli gira attorno. Sta scappando via verso il lago, guarda che storia.
Это красота и тайна. Недаром этим крылатым существам посвящено столько песен, сказаний, стихов и легенд. Но, к сожалению, последние годы эта красота подвергается все большей опасности. Только за последние 350 лет...
Олежка, смотри.
Ой, ничего себе! Что это? Вау! Блин! Что это?
Пропал. Офигеть.
Что это было? Обалдеть. Но, к сожалению, последние годы эта красота подвергается все большей опасности. Только за последние 350 лет...
Олежка, смотри.
Ой, ничего себе! Что это? Вау!
so it's safe to talk about flying saucers and people from outer space, people who may be circulating among us now and who demonstrate their unearthly qualities if they choose you as one of their agents by disappearing and reappearing at will in your very presence, in front, if necessary, of many witnesses, and who land on this materialistic earth in flying saucers, to which you, if you're one of the chosen, shall enter through an anti-gravity elevator. Nothing to hold you up. You just whisk up into the body of the flying saucer, a scout ship from outer space. No, I'm not really joking, because I've got a man now, here and now, one of the men who claims fervently that he has met these people from outer space, has talked to them, and has been given secrets of things such as a time machine from men from outer space. You'll meet this man after this plebeian and earthly message. The man you're going to meet in a moment or two, Tassel, from Giant Rock, California, is a most unlikely person to claim to have seen flying saucers and been in touch with people from outer space. George is a very ordinary fellow. He doesn't make any money out of his flying saucer beliefs, but boy, he really believes them. And before I start talking to George, I want to tell you, too, that I do have a couple of doubts in my mind. We all see these newspaper reports from Socorro, New Mexico, that a mysterious craft landed and took off and left blast marks in the sand. Airline pilots from time to time talk delicately about strange aircraft circling their normal aircraft in flight, perhaps even cutting off the power of their engines momentarily. We all love to talk about the mysterious and the unknown and the flying saucers. So now it's to George Van Tassel and this question. Time machine you're building down in California.
Well, Jack, this was the result of a formula which was given to me by a man who landed a ship at my airport in 1953. And we put this formula under research, tested a number of experiments on a bench in a good electronics lab in Chicago, and we produced phenomenal results with evidence that we should do it on a larger scale in order to be able to do more with it. And this evolved out of something that started in 1953 into a 4-story high machine that we're working on down there today.
Now, George, I don't care whether the machine is 4 stories high or 40 stories high or 4 inches high. When I say calmly and unexcitedly, a time machine, what does your formula tell you you can do with a time machine?
Well, Jack, our formula has no time factor, which electronic formula does have. And on the other hand, electronic science has only had 2 dimensions to work with, the electric pattern and the magnetic pattern perpendicular to it. And we discovered a 3rd zone, which we call a time zone, and we are working through this zone with an effort to orient the magnetic field to give us other results than our science can obtain at present.
George, just double talk to me. A time machine means to me a little box that I can go into and go back 5,000 years or forward 10,000 years. Is that what your formula tells you you can do?
Well, Jack, this isn't a little box. This is a 4-story machine focusing fields that we can orient to produce this zone big enough for a man to get into. It isn't a box.
But what happens to the man when he gets into the zone? I'm all agog with curiosity.
Jack, we've discovered this zone is subject to thought. Now, since time doesn't record events the way we do on calendars and clocks, you could only record an event by thinking of it. Now, theoretically, we believe we can take a videotape magnetic camera into the time zone and photograph Lincoln's Gettysburg Address or Caesar's armies marching or anything that's ever happened.
All right, let me get this straight. In other words, you're telling me, like H.G. Wells imagined 50 years ago, that everything that happened in time is still there to be seen by the recreation electronically of a thought which exists.
Jack, you know how you talk into a tape on a tape recorder and play the interruptions back, identical to the play that you made. The Earth's magnetic field is the same way. You can put interruptions into it and play them back out of it. An associate of ours in creating a magnetic coupler with this principle coupled in the Earth's magnetic field and played back TV shows from stations that aren't even in business anymore.
You mean an experiment has been done to bring out of the air television programs which have been and gone?
Been and gone.
Now, where was this experiment conducted?
It was conducted in Santa Monica by an associate of mine.
Why hasn't this hit the headlines throughout the world? That's a time machine in action. If I can...
Jack, the reason it hasn't hit the world is because, as I understand it now, the Navy Department took him and the research over because he also discovered he could bounce magnetic echoes off the ionosphere and locate submarines under the ocean, regardless of where they were.
So who is this associate of yours?
This is a fellow named Charlie Arts.
Charlie Arts?
Yeah.
And is he a free man walking around today?
Well, he's free where he is in this super-secret research he's conducting.
Now, so therefore, you tell me soberly in front of this television camera that things, old television programs have been recreated out of nothing.
Played back with a picture and the sound just as good as the day they were broadcast. We've done this many times.
Why didn't you bring one up with you?
Well, this requires quite a piece of apparatus. This magnetic coupler works on around 50,000 volts, and it doesn't have any radio frequency connected with it. And actually, the television set which plays back the picture doesn't even have an antenna connected to it.
George, you know as well as I do, and you've been on television 350 times, and I've known you. I met you once 7 years ago, and I kind of like you. But you know what the people out there are saying. They're saying this man's a nut.
Well, Jack, you know, when Fulton was running his steamboat up the Hudson River, there were people still standing on the bank saying it couldn't be done.
All right, let me take you further back, though. You have a time machine plan. You have done experiments which show you can bring the past to life. Where did this formula come from?
I love that Scotch accent. Jack, the formula came from a ship that landed at my airport in 1953 on August the 24th. Which had 4 people aboard it that came from another planet.
I'm breathless.
Well, you're not only breathless, I was breathless.
But I'm cynical, too.
Well, that's fine. That's the way to be. In fact, I'm a bigger skeptic than you are of many things.
I'm an unbeliever. Convince me that this really happened to you.
Well, this thing is very similar to a thing that happened in our biblical records where a Lord presented Moses with a pattern to build a tabernacle. They came out of the sky, they handed him stone tablets, and this phenomena that's taking place today is as old as our history, as our civilization. This isn't anything new that's occurring. It's something that's being continued in another time of crisis when conditions affecting the people of this planet are reaching a point where somebody has to take care of the situation.
Now, I don't intend in any way to be disrespectful or blasphemous, but do you feel, and I know you're not an evangelistic type, do you feel that you're some kind of Moses receiving a new word?
Well, I don't say that, Jack. I say that what is occurring now has occurred before. There's many records of these ships landing throughout history, clear back into Sanskrit. And there are records in the 1898 Chicago newspapers that covered the front page for 3 days of a big ship setting over Chicago. When you realize we're dealing with a type of man that is almost as far above us in intelligence as we are above the lower animals, there isn't anything phenomenal in this at all.
Now, you say casually, because this is your life's work now, ships. Now, you mean flying saucer, don't you?
Well, a flying saucer was a name the press put on this thing. And actually what they termed a flying saucer was nothing but a scout ship from the big carriers.
But I want to go back to that night in 1953. Tell me, where did this happen for people who haven't heard you talk or seen you yet?
It happened on my airport, which I've operated for the last 16 years, at Giant Rock Airport, 17 miles north of Yucca Valley in California. or 40 miles north of Palm Springs.
Now, this is a private airport for small aircraft, is it?
This is an airport used both by the military and private aircraft.
You own this airport, do you?
I leased this airport from the United States government. I've operated it for 16 years since I retired from the flight test business in the aviation.
Right now. How old are you now, by the way, George?
I'm 54, Jack. Got 3 grown daughters married and 11 grandchildren.
You don't mind if I ask you the stock question? I know that you've been asked every obnoxious question that can ever have been asked. You've never been treated for any form of emotional upset.
I've never had an emotional upset other than women.
Except that night in Yucca Flats, not Yucca Flats, at Giant Rock, when this ship appeared. Now, give me the details, George, because I'm never tired of hearing the details of a man who says he has seen creatures from another world.
Well, actually, Jack, this was as simple as crossing a street and getting hit by a car. After it's over, you're the victim of the circumstance. And I didn't see the ship land. One of my son-in-laws, that wasn't my son-in-law at that time, saw it come down. Another man on the airport heard it, and he wasn't where he could see it. And the man got off of the ship and approached me before I even knew there was a ship down.
Where were you then? What time of day or night was it?
It was 2 o'clock in the morning and approximately a full moon, which is like daylight on the desert.
Were you walking about outside or what?
No, I was sound asleep when he awakened me.
This man awakened you?
Well, something awakened me.
So you got up out of your bed?
I got out of my bed and went aboard the ship at his request.
This man, in what language did he converse with you?
He talked to me in the best English equivalent to Ronald Coleman.
And he met you there and he said, what did he say, come with me to my ship, or what?
No, he said, I asked him what he wanted, because we have a lot of people come in stuck in the sand and broken axles and whatnot. And I asked him what he wanted, and he said, my name is Solgonda, and I would be pleased to show you our craft.
Solgonda?
Solgonda.
Was the craft visible to you at this time?
It was. When he stated this, I saw beyond him the ship, which I hadn't seen before.
What did you see?
A bell-shaped type of anti-gravity ship that they operate as a scout ship out of their big carriers.
How big?
This was 36 feet in diameter and 19 feet high.
And where was it, on the ground?
No, it was hovering 10 feet off the ground.
And how did you go into this ship?
I walked with him to a spot underneath it, and an anti-gravity beam took me up through a hole in the bottom of it.
You're telling me at 2 o'clock in the morning in Giant Rock Airport, you walked underneath this hovering ship, and whammo, you went up inside.
No, you didn't go whammo. You went just about as slow as a local elevator run.
And when you got off the anti-gravity elevator, what did it look like?
I was inside of a ship about 18 feet in diameter and roughly 10 feet high to the domed ceiling, and there were 3 men on the ship, besides the one that had got off and invited me aboard.
You keep calling them men. What do you mean, man?
Well,
little green man?
They were about 5'6". They came about to my eyebrows, and they could have walked in our clothes down any of our streets, and we wouldn't have paid any attention to them.
And did you bring any proof off that ship? Were you alone in the ship?
I was alone with the 3 men until the other fellow came up behind me, and then the 4 of them were aboard.
Were there any other earthly eyewitnesses to this?
Nothing, only outside of the ship.
And these people stayed outside?
On the airport.
And did you go anywhere in this ship?
Not to my knowledge. When I got off, it was the same place it was when I got on.
What do you mean, not to your knowledge? Had the door closed when you went in or something?
I don't know, because it was below the deck.
And did these people tell you where they came from?
They didn't say where they came from, but I've been in the air game since 1927, and their instruments were unlike anything I'd ever seen before.
Well, don't give me technicalities. What was different?
The difference was that we used dial instruments, and they used vertical instruments, like fluorescent tubes with marks on them.
What color were these people?
The instruments were marked in symbols similar to hieroglyphics. They were not in any language or number system we use on the Earth.
What color were these people?
They looked like they were white people with a good, healthy tan.
Did they give you any indication of how old they were, or what they ate, or where they came from at all?
After we got off the ship, the man who invited me aboard, who didn't look a day over 28 years of age, told me that he was over 700 years of age in our time.
Oh, come off it, George.
That's right.
Was this the guy who gave you the formula for the time machine?
That's the man.
And what form did the formula take? Did he implant it in your mind by telepathy, or did he give you something written in English?
He spoke it to me verbally.
And you remembered this?
There's nothing to it to remember.
Will you tell me now? The formula for a time machine.
F equals 1 over T.
F equals 1 over T.
F being frequency and T being time.
And this enables me to go back to the time of Caesar's armies conquering Britain.
Well, it would enable a mathematician to work this out, yes.
And why hasn't this been acclaimed like Einstein's E equals mc squared?
Well, why hasn't the fact that the United States government's been flying anti-gravity ships since 1956 been acclaimed? Or the fact that there's a crater on the moon with a base in it since 1954, we've known this.
All right, but let's get, first of all, the U.S. Why haven't the FBI clapped you incommunicado for breaking secrets that they want to keep secret in the United States?
Well, possibly because they know this information is going to get out eventually anyway, and what I say won't make any difference.
Now, that particular night when you had this experience, did you call the police? Did you call the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the White House?
Well, I'm 17 miles from the nearest phone, Jack, and the nearest phone would get me to the sheriff's office, and it'd take them about 40 minutes to get out there.
Oh, wouldn't you have a phone on an airport?
No, we have no phone.
But you're an operating airport.
Well, we're an operating airport, but we're isolated in the middle of the desert, 17 miles from the closest town, and they've never run phones out there.
So how do you communicate with people who want to use your airport?
They fly in or write and phone to the local town where my daughter lives, and she notifies us when she comes out.
Now, you talked about a crater on the moon. Now, I thought all the moon stuff had been debunked and that nobody ever really knows what goes on the moon. What's this?
Well, this is the Gassendi crater. This is 55 miles long and oval-shaped. It's in the Mare Humorum Sea, or on the edge of it. Since 35 years ago, they wondered why this particular crater had these lines in it. And with the magnification which you can get with the larger telescopes, this is what they found. These lines are tubes laying on the surface of this crater and running under some of the mountain ridges. There are 3 large dome-shaped structures in here. These tubes run clear outside of the crater, and we know they are tubes laying on the surface because the sun is shining from this angle, and this mountain peak causes this shadow.
What does it all mean? Does it mean that this is a rocket launching or a flying saucer base on the moon?
This has been a base on the moon for perhaps many thousands of years, used by these people in the spaceships to resupply their ships or whatever is required.
Not even Life magazine has accepted this as genuine, or has it?
Well, the Palomar Observatory people that took the picture won't even comment on it, so...
There must be a great conspiracy of silence to keep George Van Tassel's secret of the universe away from the people.
No, it isn't to keep anything I know away from the people. It's to keep many things away from the people.
Let's talk about this picture. This is the time machine.
This is a picture of the machine we're building down there. This structure is actually up. We're working now on the parts on the equipment that operate it. This rim around here has armatures 57 feet in diameter, which will be better than 4 times bigger than the biggest armatures ever made before.
But is that the place where you did the experiments? By the way, how old were these television programs you pulled back out of time and space?
Well, the oldest one was 6 years back because television was 6 years old when this was done.
And what program was it? Do you remember?
I don't remember what program, but I know that on checking up on some of the stations that Art found that the station no longer existed. It was out of business.
Let's get down to some more basics now. Are you making a lucrative living out of traveling around the world evangelizing for flying, around the continent, evangelizing for flying saucers?
No, Jack, I'm on a vacation to rest my wife because she's been 2 years in a 40-seat restaurant without a rest, more than anything else, and I enjoy these particular things as a sideline. I make my living on the airport, and this research is something that I've got more money into than anybody else and more contribution to it. 5 years of intensive research without any pay. We donated 10 acres of land with a well worth $23,000, and we formed this corporation for the purpose of building up and investigating this basic material.
All right, now how long is it going to take you to get your time machine in operation?
Well,
I mean, it all sounds so crazy. You must admit, I believe there are some odd things, George, but I find it hard to credit because I wasn't there myself, your own experiences.
Well, it took them around 8 years to grind the mirror for the 200-inch telescope, and the first cyclotron was something like 11 years in the progress of building.
But that cost millions, George. You haven't got millions, billions it costs.
No, we don't have the overhead, the drafts from the engineers and people sitting around the payroll. All of our effort on this is voluntary by many people in technical fields that contribute their effort to the project.
They all believe in flying saucers?
They all believe in flying saucers.
You obviously believe totally in flying saucers.
Yeah.
Because of that one, does your wife believe in flying saucers?
Well, I don't know very many people that don't. It's as obvious as believing in heaven or afterlife or anything else. You have certain things you believe in life. You believe there's air we breathe, yet you don't see it. We fly airplanes on it. And this is an intangible. We can measure it.
But why should these people come down, from outer space? Why don't they land in the White House or in Kremlin Square in Moscow and say, hey, listen to us, we can tell you a few things. We're 700 years old. We can travel through space. We're not concerned with time differentials.
Well, probably they're not concerned with giving us too much of their information because we'd only use it in our battle to destroy each other here.
Did these 4 men tell you that themselves?
No, they didn't tell me that, but this is a reasonable assumption on our part that the world's divided in 2 camps, each capable of eliminating the whole civilization. And if we were to go to another planet and observe this condition, we would certainly be a little cautious about who we talk to or what we reveal.
Yeah, but you yourself, was that the only experience you had? Mind you, that's 11 years ago in 1953, George.
That's right.
When you claimed to me you went up in this elevator into the spaceship and met the guy who spoke like Ronald Koeman. Was that your only contact with the...
That was the only contact I had with the people from the ship.
Did you have you had any other contacts with people?
I've had a recent contact last September, 1963.
Well, I don't have to ask you. Tell me.
Well, in this case, they drove a car into the airport. They didn't come in a ship. They're walking among us on the earth all the time, and we don't realize it.
I'm breathless. They. How many was they?
The they in the ship was 4 men.
They in the car?
The man that came in, there was a man came in by himself in September.
Well, you'll be telling me he had Martian license plates on the car.
No. They drove a standard American Cadillac.
And what did they want with you in 1963, 10 years later?
They gave me some more information pertinent to electronic and magnetic research.
But how did you know they were from some mysterious place in outer space?
You don't know unless they want you to know, and then they'll demonstrate some thing that they can do that we can't do, that's humanly impossible for us to do.
What did they demonstrate to you which convinced you, an apparently sober, sensible, balanced person who nevertheless believes in flying saucers, that convinced you they were unearthly people?
Well, they demonstrated the ability in front of 19 people sitting in a lounge, for instance, that they could sit there and disappear before your eyes and reappear. In fact, the man did this 3 times.
For you and your friends?
For 19 witnesses that were sitting in our lounge.
Vanished in front of your eyes?
Sit right there in a chair like you're there, and then you're not there, and then you're back there. He did this 3 times.
Now, I'm going to disappear, but purely for 1 minute for this message. The previous foregoing interview with George Van Tassel of Giant Rock Airport, California, was not, I must stress, presented to you as a scientific examination of George's claims. There are so many holes in George's claims, even to the layman like myself, that one is bound to be, how shall I put it, a trifle cynical. For instance, why didn't George keep one of the men with him to produce a living proof? And then we could have checked medically his heart and lungs and everything else about him to try and substantiate the claim that he is 700 Earth years of age. And why didn't he at least tell George where they came from? Or why didn't he at least present George with some physical, concrete proof so that people wouldn't regard him with suspicion and skepticism as someone who was perhaps just a little bit You know, overly easily convinced perhaps by some form of hallucination. But he did tell us one thing, how to recognize visitors from outer space. If they ever come to you and you're sitting in the room and they snap their fingers 3 times and disappear, and when they reappear a few seconds later, then you'll know for sure that they are from outer space. Thank you and good night.
It's a remarkable piece of footage. If it's a hoax, it's very well done. If it's not, then I would say it's probably revolutionary.
It's a fake, in my opinion.
If you continue to ask questions that are out of bounds, I won't hesitate to terminate this interview.
This is powerful because this is not a staged event. This is real.
Interest in UFOs and Area 51 is at an all-time high. Last year, a highly rated TV special and best-selling home video purported to show an actual autopsy of an alien being from the famous Roswell, New Mexico crash of 1947. Many people and even some experts believed that autopsy footage was genuine. If that was indeed the body of an alien being from another world, could the footage in this program be the world's first hard visual evidence of an actual living and breathing alien being? An alien being communicating in an interview with a highly covert arm of the U.S. government? If the footage we're about to show you is genuine, then this could very well be the most important video in the history of mankind, proving once and for all that we are not alone.
Within Nevada's Nellis Air Force Range, protected by the tightest security in the world, is the Groom Lake Test Site, aka Dreamland, aka Area 51. An installation so secret, the government cryptically acknowledges its existence only as an operating location. Until recently, the military flat out denied the presence of such a base. It has served as the testing ground for many secret research and development projects, such as the U-2 and SR-71 Blackbird spy planes, the F-117A stealth fighter, and now the SR-75 penetrator, the super-secret replacement for the SR-71. Every morning, a select group of specialists with high security clearances, some reportedly as high as 38 levels above top secret, arrive at McCarran Airport in Las Vegas to be flown to Area 51 aboard a Boeing 737. From the time they leave the ground until they return to Las Vegas at the end of each working day, they enter a world no outsider can ever truly know, except through rumor and the occasional shocking revelation.
In 1989, a physicist named Robert Lazar went public with the stunning claim that the United States government was test flying dish-shaped aircraft of extraterrestrial origin at Area 51. Interviewed in silhouette by a Las Vegas TV reporter, Lazar, calling himself Dennis, claimed to be employed at a site on the outskirts of Area 51 known as S4, where he was part of a team attempting to back-engineer the saucers to discover the secret of their advanced propulsion system.
It was a very sleek, thin-looking, flying saucer-shaped craft. There were 9 total. I only got to essentially work, back engineer, or analyze one of the craft. It's very plain. It's all one solid color, a grayish pewter color, the same color as the outside of the craft. There are no sharp corners anywhere. Every device in the craft, the seat, the amplifier housings, everything has a rounded corner on it, almost as if it was all fashioned out of wax and then slightly melted, so everything curved, even where the ceiling meets the floor on the end. Everything has a curve to it. Very, very plain, very wide open, very impractical use of space. And there are 3 levels. The lower level houses the amplifiers themselves that swing, the 3 of them. The center level is where you enter the craft, where the seats and the amplifiers are, and the top level is a small area, and I did not have access to that, so I don't know what's up there. Absolutely alien craft, there's no question about it. Well, first of all, the scope of the project was to back engineer it. If they were United States craft, we wouldn't be going backward trying to find out how they were built if we had built them. Second of all, the size of the equipment inside, the size of the seats, the materials that were in use, completely alien to us, pardon the pun, and the fuel, element 115, essentially non-existent. All these factors together, and of course the briefing information stating that they were alien craft.
Along with Robert Lazar, rocket scientist David Adair is one of the few individuals who will go on record concerning his personal experiences with alien technology at Area 51.
Was not of our origin. They shouldn't have let me see that. And then in the results of it, they locked me in a room. And the reason they locked me up in a room was because I wouldn't tell them any more about how the engine would function, and they started getting a little bit more perturbed about that.
A former consultant to NASA and top aerospace companies, Adair claims that in 1971 he was brought in to study the engine of a downed flying saucer.
What I was looking at was a technological marvel of its time, and it was a magnificent thing to see sitting there, and the whole situation just started really getting me more angry than anything, because the fact that they could sit on such a hunk of technology and not tell us about it. Here we are using liquid fuel engines and rockets at NASA, and here they got an engine that's probably, in theory that we know of, could be a speed of light. An engine.
The amplifier housings, everything has a rounded corner on it, almost as if it was all fashioned out of wax and then slightly melted, so everything curved, even where the ceiling meets the floor on the end. Everything has a curve to it. Very, very plain, very wide open, very impractical use of space. And there are 3 levels. The lower level houses the amplifiers themselves that swing, the 3 of them. The center level is where you enter the craft, where the seats and the amplifiers are, and the top level is a small area, and I did not have access to that, so I don't know what's up there. Absolutely alien craft, there's no question about it. Well, first of all, the scope of the project was to back engineer it. If they were United States craft, we wouldn't be going backward trying to find out how they were built if we had built them. Second of all, the size of the equipment inside, the
primitive medical care of a species that had barely begun to conquer its own diseases. But as we will hear, there are those who claim that to the aliens, death is not a final end to be feared, but a mere transition.
It was in the late 40s and early 50s that the U.S. government's policy toward UFOs was formulated. Publicly, there was Project Blue Book, which made a great show of gathering data on all the major UFO sightings, finally declaring them all to be hoaxes, mass hysteria, or swamp gas. But secretly, there may have been another policy at work. Over the years, several documents have come to light which seemingly confirm that a clandestine group, Operation Majestic 12 Group, aka MJ-12, was formed by special classified presidential order on September 24, 1947, for the express purpose of gathering information on UFOs and extraterrestrials, while at the same time keeping such information not only from unfriendly powers, but from the American public as well. If indeed Area 51 has become the nation's repository for alien technology and possibly alien visitors, then the extra-constitutional justifications for such secrecy were developed in the MJ-12 group's planning sessions. James B. Forrestal, Secretary of Defense under President Harry Truman, is widely accused of being the mastermind behind the creation of MJ-12. Once created, Majestic may have expanded its mandate beyond what Forrestal had intended. Whatever secrets Forrestal may have known concerning flying saucers and alien visitors, that knowledge died with him when in 1949 he mysteriously plunged to his death from a window at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Though he was being treated for depression, many UFO researchers doubt that his death was a suicide and point to the sinister workings of the possibly mythical MJ-12, which in their hypothesis may have been protecting its secrecy from a man who had come to believe the people had a right to know. As late as 1989, according to Bob Lazar, the identification badges at Area 51 read MADGE for Majestic. In December 1994, a document purporting to be the Majestic 12 Group Special Operations Manual was leaked to a noted UFO researcher. It contains the following directive under the heading Isolation and Custody. EBEs will be detained by whatever means are necessary and removed to a secure location as soon as possible. There follows this disturbing amplification. Although it is preferable to maintain the physical well-being of any entity, the loss of EBE life is considered acceptable if conditions or delays to preserve that life in any way compromise the security of the operations. From the beginning of the UFO age, it seems, secrecy was always the government's prime directive.
In 1988, another anonymous government source, codenamed Falcon, claimed that a second extraterrestrial biological entity, EBE-2, voluntarily became a guest of our government, allowing himself to be examined and interviewed. In this scenario, Area 51 became, for a time at least, a sort of extraterrestrial embassy, the setting for mankind's first attempt at diplomacy with beings from another world. Different sources disagree as to how communication was established. There is universal agreement that the EBEs are incapable or unwilling to speak human language. In addition to the pictographs used by EBE-1, it has been reported by Falcon that in the early 1950s, EBE-2 was fitted with some sort of artificial voice box, allowing him to speak words, and that he learned the English language very rapidly. Other sources doubt this story, however.
By our kind, do you mean we Americans?
What has been reported most persistently is that the aliens communicate via thought projection, or telepathy.
They would have been tortured, made to give up their secrets, instead of questioned in this friendly manner.
We cannot be forced to communicate.
Has it been tried? Not by us.
We speak to who's ever willing to listen.
The idea of telepathic communication with alien beings carries with it the same doubts and controversy attached to telepathy itself. Do the practitioners of this ancient art really have the ability to read minds? Or are they crafty charlatans who simply tell the listener what he or she wants to hear? If the cynics are right, then the self-proclaimed telepaths recruited by the government in the 1950s were playing an astoundingly daring hoax by claiming to speak for the mute visitors from the stars. Defenders of telepathy call this notion preposterous and point to the long history of government-funded research into mind reading as proof that their science has merit. In the last 4 decades, there have been persistent, often contradictory rumors and even eyewitness accounts of other alien visitors meeting secretly with military or government officials. But what about today? The Tester Corporation has recently come out with a model kit of Gray, the extraterrestrial life form, and a scale model of the so-called sport model, the UFO Bob Lazar says he studied at Area 51. This UFO kit has quickly become one of the most successful model kits in the history of the company. If the military is, in fact, conducting tests of extraterrestrial spacecraft at Area 51, extraterrestrial biological entity, EBE-2, voluntarily became a guest of our government, allowing himself to be examined and interviewed. In this scenario, Area 51 became, for a time at least, a sort of extraterrestrial embassy, the setting for mankind's first attempt at diplomacy with beings from another world. Different sources disagree as to how communication was established. There is universal agreement that the EBEs are incapable or unwilling to speak human language. In addition to the pictographs used by EBE-1, it has been reported by Falcon that in the early 1950s, EBE-2 was fitted with some sort of artificial voice box, allowing him to speak words, and that he learned the English language very rapidly. Other sources doubt this story, however.
As late as 1989, according to Bob Lazar, the identification badges at Area 51 read MAJ for Majestic. In December 1994, a document purporting to be the Majestic 12 Group Special Operations Manual was leaked to a noted UFO researcher. It contains the following directive under the heading Isolation and Custody. EBEs will be detained by whatever means are necessary and removed to a secure location as soon as possible. There follows this disturbing amplification. Although it is preferable to maintain the physical well-being of any entity, the loss of EBE life is considered acceptable if conditions or delays to preserve that life in any way compromise the security of the operations. From the beginning of the UFO age, it seems, secrecy was always the government's prime directive.
In 1988, another anonymous government source, codenamed Falcon, claimed that a second
from unfriendly powers, but from the American public as well. If indeed Area 51 has become the nation's repository for alien technology and possibly alien visitors, then the extra-constitutional justifications for such secrecy were developed in the MJ-12 Group's planning sessions. James B. Forrestal, Secretary of Defense under President Harry Truman, is widely accused of being the mastermind behind the creation of MJ-12. Once created, Majestic may have expanded its mandate beyond what Forrestal had intended. Whatever secrets Forrestal may have known concerning flying saucers and alien visitors, that knowledge died with him when in 1949 he mysteriously plunged to his death from a window at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Though he was being treated for depression, many UFO researchers doubt that his death was a suicide and point to the sinister workings of the possibly mythical MJ-12, which in their hypothesis may have been protecting its secrecy from a man who had come to believe the people had a right to know.
I guess I'm going to mention this because I'm a little...
Then, on May 6th, 1997, at a Phoenix City Council meeting, Councilwoman Frances Barwood posed a simple question.
Anybody has any information from the city, and if the city is checking into it?
I said, can we find out why nobody's investigating? Can we look into it? And there was this silence.
People are starting to ask more questions. Thanks. Thank you.
And then that was kind of it, and went on to the next one.
No one from the city council seemed to feel that there was any compelling reason to investigate the sightings. Undaunted, Barwood kept pushing the city, trying to get officials to take the many eyewitness reports seriously.
And the response that I got back, which was about a week later, was that the city of Phoenix did not have an Air Force, which I kind of knew, and that they had received less than 5 phone calls into the police department. And I thought that was odd because I was told that they had gotten a lot of phone calls. So that to me didn't make sense if, you know, they're saying they were overwhelmed with phone calls, and then the response I got back from the city manager's office was they had less than 5 phone calls. To them, it was not important.
43 days after Councilwoman Barwood's initial request, Arizona Governor Fife Symington announced that his office would spearhead an official government investigation into the events of March 13, 1997.
We're going to make all the necessary inquiries, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to find.
This announcement came as welcome news to concerned Phoenix citizens who had been waiting more than 3 months for an explanation to the strange events they witnessed. On June 19th, Governor Symington called a press conference to present what he considered vital information regarding the incidents. He announced that a police investigation had determined the source of the lights, and for the first time admitted that there may have been an extraterrestrial connection.
And now I'll ask Officer Stein and his colleagues to escort the accused into the room so that we may all look upon the guilty party. Don't get him too close to me, please. It's, you know. Now, this just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
Then he takes off his mask and he realizes it's one of the governor's aides, and everyone has a good chuckle. Well, some people had a good chuckle. The TV station that carried it live wasn't too happy, but the governor said it was just, you know, a little joke, and he was having some fun with it.
My 10-year-old saw that, and that really made her feel uncomfortable because she's feeling that they're sitting there saying that what she saw she didn't see. She saw it, I saw it, other parents saw it, teachers saw it, a lot of people in the valley saw it, but they won't give us an answer.
The governor's lighthearted attitude and the lack of any official government investigation to the events of March 13th left many of the concerned eyewitnesses dumbfounded. Frustrated and angry, they began searching for answers on their own.
Submitted for your approval. What have we got here?
Clear photographic evidence of these events, there was no official investigation. Finally, desperate for answers, many eyewitnesses turned elsewhere for help. Village Labs is a computer visual effects design firm operated by Michael Tanner and Jim Delatoso. In addition to their work for films and television, Tanner and Delatoso have carefully studied reports and analyzed photographic evidence of many UFO sightings. They have received a great deal of media exposure for their various investigations, and as they are located in Phoenix, they became a natural place for concerned residents to turn.
We're a lab. We're just like a police lab. We're just like a medical lab where professional investigators send us their evidence. And we've looked at hundreds and hundreds of cases where the evidence that we get is film or video. Thanks for coming to the Phoenix Lights briefing number 4.
In town meetings like this, eyewitnesses finally found someone who would take them and their sightings seriously.
It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before because the lights were extremely bright, white lights, and there were 5 because I distinctly counted them to make sure that there were 5 lights.
Tanner and Delatoso began their investigation by conducting a series of discussion groups with eyewitnesses to the events.
I thought it was perhaps helicopters or something like that. But as it was coming closer, we noticed that the lights were so rigidly in reference to each other. If it was helicopters, these people, either they were connected with a bar or something like that, or they were really super, super excellent flyers because it wasn't doing any of this, it wasn't doing any of that, it wasn't doing any of that. It was like locked.
Although many aspects of the eyewitness reports were the same, there were some discrepancies between accounts.
We looked at it for a couple seconds, and then I realized that I had my telescope out. So I pointed my telescope at it, and at that point I noticed that they were airplanes.
I did not see airplanes. I watched this thing come at me from great distance, and it took a long time before it even arrived. 30 miles an hour, that's about it. This thing didn't appear to fly, it appeared to float. We are not trying to be the FBI. You know, I'm trying to find out because I need to know. And if these guys...
The witnesses represent the total cross-section of our society here. We have truck drivers, we have doctors, we have lawyers, we have retired military, and they're all genuine.
Have you ever seen any kind of lights like that on an airplane?
Never seen anything like this before, ever. Anywhere.
They're just simply ordinary people having extraordinary experiences, and they're sharing those with us. When you saw the lights coming, tell me again the shape.
Well, at first, it was kind of like a rounded arc.
When it became clear that there were multiple events.
Remise, your